Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we'll be looking at Ruth chapter 3, where we read about a meeting in the night in our study of the book of Ruth. Back in chapter 2 of Ruth, we had the story that took place at the beginning of the harvest, where Ruth and Naomi have arrived in Bethlehem, and there's a encounter where Ruth meets Boaz. In chapter 3, now some time has passed. We're at the end of the harvest. And remember, harvest in Israel is in the springtime. In chapter 2, the story takes place in the fields. In chapter 3, it's on the threshing floor. That's still in the fields. Threshing floor sounds like it might be indoors. That's not. A threshing floor was located outdoors in a wide open place, preferably up on the top of a hill. In chapter 2, we read of Ruth's service to Naomi as she is out collecting the ancient equivalent of food stamps. Now we're going to see Ruth's request that she makes of Boaz. Ruth chapter 3 and verse 1, Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, that is, said to Ruth, My daughter, shall I not seek security for you? And the rest of this chapter is going to be the quest for security for Ruth, that it may be well with you. Now is not Boaz our kinsman, with whose maids you were? Behold, he winnows barley at the threshing floor tonight. Wash yourself, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. Now, I said a threshing floor, that's not something in an enclosed area. That's out in the open. And that term threshing floor sounds sort of strange to us. What you would do, you would take grain, and you would gather it, and then you would grind it, and then once it's all ground up, you've got the grain, both the inner core of the grain, and also the outward kernel, the outward husk. And you would take all this, it's all mixed together, and you'd throw it up in the air. Again and again and again. And the reason you're out in the open, preferably in a high open place where there's lots of good wind, the wind catches the husk, the chaff, and it blows it away because that's lighter. The grain itself is heavier. The good part that you want to keep is heavier, and it falls right back down to the ground. And so they would be doing this all day to blow away all this useless husk, all the useless chaff, but they would want to keep the grain. And so notice Ruth is told, go to the threshing floor where they've been doing that, but do not make yourself known to the man until he's finished eating and drinking. At the end of the day, he's finished eating, he's finished drinking. It shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go and uncover his feet and lie down, and then he will tell you what you shall do. She said to her, that is, Ruth says to Naomi, all that you say I will do. So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law had commanded her. So she's getting her, we call them her marching orders, and she's going to do those things. Verse 7, when Boaz had eaten and drunk, his heart was merry. He went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, because that's what they've been doing. They've been, gathering all this grain and winnowing it and threshing it. And she came secretly and uncovered his feet and lay down. Now that sounds sort of unusual to us, but remember what they wore back then. They didn't wear a shirt and trousers and things like that. They wore a long robe. There wouldn't necessarily be a whole lot under that robe. And so when she is uncovering his feet, that is a little suggestive of something. Look at verse 8. Verse 8, it happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled and bent forward. He looks up, and there's a woman lying at his feet. Whoa, what's that about? That's rather unusual, and maybe just a little improper if it's not his wife. Verse 9, he said, who are you? Because it's dark at night. It's not like you can turn on the lights. Ancient culture. He said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your maid. So, and notice the wording here, so spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative. Now we're going to come back and look at that phrase covering, that word covering. Spread your covering. Suffice it to say for right now, literally you would say, spread your wings. But it has the same meaning, the outer corner of your robe. Share your robe with me. Put your wings, the wings of your robe, over me, for you are a close relative. Verse 10, then he said, may you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. Notice, she has come to Boaz, and she has said, you are the close relative. Now, we're going to look next time at the Greek word there, or sorry, Hebrew word there, but the Hebrew word is goel, and it's significant there. You're the next close relative, but the word actually has also the connotation of the redeemer, because a redeemer had to be a close relative. And he's saying to her, you're desiring to do something. You're desiring to pass on that lineage, to be redeemed, to continue to be part of our extended family. And you can't do that physically anymore because your husband died and left you with no children. And instead of going to try to find a husband among the young men, whether they were poor or rich, you have come to me, a close relative, a goel, a kinsman, one with whom you can have children, and they'll still be connected to that family into which you've entered. Verse 11, now he instructs her, now my daughter, do not fear, I will do for you whatever you ask. And what she is asking is that he would become sort of the stand-in husband in place of the husband that she lost. That he would be the substitute, the redeemer, the close relative who takes that redemption process and stands in for the one that's missing. Now my daughter, he says, do not fear. Notice, my daughter sounds like he's a bit older and she's quite a bit younger. No, now my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask, for all my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence. Verse 12, though, here's an issue. Now it is true I am a close relative. I am a goel. I am a redeemer. However, there's another relative closer than I. There's another relative that's maybe he's a second cousin or third cousin. We're not exactly sure. But there's someone that's closer who has that right of redemption. And so he's saying to her, you might have the wrong guy, but I'll be him, but let me check to make sure that the way is clear. Let me go and do this in a proper manner. And so verse 13, remain this night, and when morning comes, if he will redeem you, good, let him redeem you. But if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you. I'll be husband number two if husband number one, of course, husband number one had died. If husband number two isn't available, I'll be husband number two. But until then, I have to wait my turn. So let's not do anything. But if he does not wish to redeem you, then I will redeem you as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning, and we'll just wait. Sort of be patient here. Verse 14, so she lay at his feet until morning, and rose before one could recognize another. As the light, the sky just begins to get a little bit light in the east. That's when she gets up. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Let's protect her reputation. Don't be gossiping about this. Verse 15, again he said, give me the cloak that is on you and hold it. So she held it, and he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her. And then she went into the city. So she takes, some food into the city, both promissory but also to provide for her and for Naomi. Verse 16, when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did it go, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done for her. So Naomi gets the story that we've just read about. And she said, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said, do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed. This is actually a gift for Naomi. Verse 18, then she said, wait, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest until he has settled it today. And so this is what happened the night. We're going to see in the next chapter what happens that next day. But before we leave, I want to go back and look at 2 phrases. One we saw back in chapter 2. Remember when Ruth first met when Ruth first met Boaz, Boaz said to Ruth, may the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel. And notice the phrasing there, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. It was a picture of Ruth had come to be under the wings of the Lord. Now, that same phrase I mentioned was used here in chapter 3, verse 9. The exact same word for wings, although it's translated differently. Ruth chapter 3, verse 9, when Ruth says to Boaz, now spread your coverings, literally spread your wings. That's what you referred to as those long ends of your robe. You refer to those as the wings. So spread your wings over your maid, for you are a close relative. Boaz had wished Ruth blessing because she had sought covering under the wings of the Lord. And now Ruth says, well, okay, you be those wings of the Lord. You be that instrument that God uses. Spread your covering over me. It reminds us of a passage that comes much later in the Old Testament, Malachi chapter 4, where there's a promise of God's judgment. For behold, the day is coming, burning like a furnace, and all the arrogant and every evildoer will be chaff. Remember what we talked about, chaff? That's the stuff that you throw away with a grain. Every evildoer will be like chaff, and the day that is coming will set them ablaze, says the Lord of hosts, so that it will leave them neither root nor branch. Verse 2, but for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with, notice this phrase, with healing in its wings. The same word. The Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, and you will go forth and skip about like calves from the stall. It's a picture of how God would come and bring healing in his wings. I can't help but think of that passage where a woman comes to Jesus, and he's in a crowd, and she reaches out and touches the edge of his robe. It's Greek, not Hebrew, so a different word is used. But if we were saying that in Hebrew, we would say, she touched his wings. There's another place where Jesus, at the end of his ministry, Matthew chapter 23, verse 37, weeps over Jerusalem. He goes up to the Mount of Olives and weeps over Jerusalem. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who were sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks, there it is, under her wings, and you were unwilling. And so there's a picture of how Jesus came to be that one that would gather and heal by his wings. Have you come to the place of being under his wings? Have you come to him in faith?